All right, let's talk about one of the most silent yet catastrophic breakdowns in the Imperium's inner machinery, the fractured heart of Mars itself. Not a battlefield soaked in blood like Armageddon, nor a warp-ravaged tomb like Cadia. No, this is quieter, colder. It's the kind of decay that spreads in whispers in silence, beneath metal floors and prayer-woven wires. The kind of rot that starts at the throne and seeps through the entire machine. You see, when people talk about the broken throne of Mars, it's easy to assume they're being poetic. Maybe they mean the symbolism of a once unified Forge world now pulled in a dozen directions by politics, heresy, or desperation. But if you look closer, past the rituals, past the sacred oil and the chants, you start noticing patterns. Forge fleets rerouted without explanation, resource-tithed disruptions that don't match any known battlefront. Data losses from STC archives no one wants to admit existed in the first place. It's like the very nerve center of the Adeptus Mechanicus is spasming, one hidden protocol at a time. The whispers have been around for centuries, of course. Some claim it started during the Age of Apostasy. Others trace it to the rise of Belisarius Cawl and his quiet accumulation of power. But lately, those whispers have grown teeth. Fan communities have started digging deeper, stitching together scattered facts from campaign books, codices, and apocryphal reports. The conclusion? Mars may no longer speak with one voice, and perhaps hasn't for a long time. The deeper you go into these reports, the more you find stories of Fabricator-Generals refusing to attend High Council convocations or acting completely autonomously. They're no longer coordinating, they're maneuvering. And when high-ranking magi begin purging their own data archives or shutting down new spheric communications for ritual recalibrations, well, you don't need an inquisitor to know something's wrong. Now, are we talking about a literal civil war with Skitarii legions clashing in the Martian dust? Not yet. But what we're seeing is something maybe worse. A cold war of code, sabotage, and broken oaths between tech priests who were once meant to be one mind. And here's where things get really interesting. Because if the throne of Mars is truly cracked, then what happens to the Imperium that relies on it? That's the question we're diving into today. Because if you believe the lore breadcrumbs, and I do, then the Red World isn't just bleeding oil. It's breaking apart from the inside. And the people doing it may be the same ones who claim to guard its sanctity. When people think about the Adeptus Mechanicus, they usually imagine a monolithic faith, a single humming chorus of binary praise directed at the Omnissiah. But that's a simplification, almost a propaganda piece. The reality is way messier. Behind the chanting, incense, and red-robed uniformity, there's a boiling stew of contradictions, power struggles, and theological schisms that would make the ecclesiarchy blush. Unity in the cult Mechanicus? That's the illusion. The truth? It's a patchwork of dogmas, grudges, and deep-rooted heresies, all barely held together by ritual and fear of being labeled a tech traitor. At the heart of it all is the Omnissiah, the machine god incarnate, or at least what everyone thinks the Omnissiah is. Because that, right there, is the first crack. Some say it's the Emperor, plain and simple, divine in flesh and electric mind. Others whisper that it's not him, never was, and that the Omnissiah is a far older, more esoteric force buried in the machine code of the universe itself. Then there are those who've gone completely off the rails, claiming the true Omnissiah has yet to come, or already came and was silenced. These aren't just minor disagreements. They define entire Forge worlds. Some, like Mars itself, lean heavily on the orthodoxy. The Emperor is the Omnissiah, no questions asked. But others, like Styges the Eight, Zana, or even some parts of Lucius, harbor factions that play dangerously close to the edge of heresy. They question, reinterpret, or outright rewrite the core tenets of the cult Mechanicus. And when Fabricator-Generals start aligning with these interpretations, you get something volatile. You get ideological warfare hidden under the guise of theological debate. The theological schism isn't just some dusty event buried in Martian archives. It's alive, breathing, and mutating through every Forge clan that dares to reconfigure the machine god's will. It began, as most things do, with silence. A few prayers omitted here. A logic string altered there, and then suddenly, entire enclaves were uploading heretical codices into their databanks. Some magi went so far as to create synthetic oracles, machine intelligences, borderline AI, tasked with decoding divine intent. That alone could have sparked a war, and maybe it did, a secret one. There's a theory that's been making the rounds among lore-obsessed Mechanicus fans, that the fragmentation of belief within the cult Mechanicus has been weaponized, not metaphorically, literally. That some Fabricator-Generals are funding rogue theologians and cultivating splinter cults, not just as tools of ideological purity, but as political weapons. If your rival believes in a different version of the machine god, it's easier to undermine them. Declare their rituals invalid, their tech prayers inefficient, their STC handling procedures sacrilegious. Suddenly, what looks like a disagreement over divine syntax becomes a reason to withhold supply convoys or sabotage energy conduits. And if that sounds insane, well, welcome to Mars. The thing is, belief shapes reality within the Mechanicus. If enough magi believe that a certain ritual causes machines to function better, then that ritual gets adopted, studied, replicated. Dogma becomes doctrine, and doctrine becomes power. So when different Forge worlds start diverging in their rites and philosophies, the consequences aren't just theological, they're infrastructural. Machines start behaving differently, tech rites fall out of sync, and entire battlefronts can be compromised by simple incompatibility. Imagine a Skitari legion suddenly rendered inoperable because its firmware follows a different liturgical cadence than the local magos thinks is correct. Some believe this fragmentation is accelerating because of Cawl's rise. The arch-magos Dominus, with his borderline heretical views and secretive projects, has become a lightning rod for dissent. He's introduced new doctrines, new technologies, and new interpretations of what it means to serve the Omnissiah. Not everyone's happy. In fact, some Forge lords view him as the tip of a spear aimed at tearing apart the old order. Whether intentionally or not, his innovations have sparked theological backlash that's echoing across Mars and beyond. And here's where it gets really messy, because some of these backlash movements have teeth. We're talking black ops, null field assassins, code-based viruses disguised as hymns. There's evidence, if you dig hard enough, that some Fabricator-Generals have sanctioned purges based not on technical error, but on belief drift. Whole data clades erased because they started referencing the wrong version of the litany of activation. Tech adepts stripped of their augmetics mid-ritual for invoking forbidden syllables. It's not just about faith. It's about who gets to define reality in a culture where belief and function are fundamentally linked. The cult Mechanicus was never as unified as the Red Robes made it seem. It was always a cathedral built on fault lines. Now those lines are shaking. And some of the Fabricator-Generals aren't trying to fix the cracks. They're pushing to widen them. Because in a world where theology equals power, a new dogma can mean a new throne. And if each of those thrones claims to be the one true seat of the Omnissiah, then the broken throne of Mars might not just be broken, it might be multiplying. If you want to understand the cracks forming across Mars, you need to start with the ones sitting at the very top, the Fabricator-Generals. These aren't just administrators or tech priests with nice titles, they're powerhouses. Each one is a living convergence of industry, faith, and war. Imagine a being who can shut down entire Forge cities with a single code phrase, who commands legions of Skitari, manipulates STC schemata like a symphony, and holds the authority to reclassify what counts as divine. That's what a Fabricator-General is. Or at least, that's what they were supposed to be. Historically, the Fabricator-General of Mars was the voice of the machine cult, not just the head of a Forge world, but the representative of all Mechanicus interests within the High Lords of Terra. A figure meant to unify, to guide, to interpret the will of the Omnissiah on behalf of billions. And during the Great Crusade, that role actually made sense. Mars was still relatively centralized, the hierarchy functioned, and despite the weirdness of Martian politics, there was at least an illusion of coherence. But after the Horus Heresy, everything changed. The Mechanicum became the Adeptus Mechanicus, and with that shift came fractures that never fully healed. The heresy didn't just break faith. It shattered the trust that once allowed different Forge worlds to coordinate. And the Fabricator-General, once the centerpiece of that unity, was forced to navigate a galaxy that no longer ran on collective loyalty, but on survival, paranoia, and power brokering. Forge worlds began to act more independently. Some broke off entirely. Others played politics with the Imperium, choosing alliances that best suited their own ambitions. And over time, the singular authority of the Fabricator-General of Mars was diluted. Not in name, Mars still claims the title, but in practice, it's a different story. Here's the dirty truth most codices skim over. There isn't just one Fabricator-General anymore. Sure, Mars still holds the ceremonial seat, but other Forge worlds have quietly appointed their own equivalents. Some call them arch-fabricators, others retain the traditional title, and even when they don't officially use it, the power is there. The ability to command fleets, to deny STC access, to dictate the spiritual orthodoxy of an entire system, that's Fabricator-General level authority, no matter what name you slap on it. And the Imperium? It mostly lets it happen, because it needs the tech, it needs the titans, the plasma weaponry, the armor, the starships. So long as the Forges keep producing, no one in the Senatorum Imperialis is going to dig too deep into who's really in charge. And that's allowed a quiet proliferation of rival power centers, each one more ambitious than the last. After the Cicatrix Maledictum tore reality apart, the situation became even worse. Communication between Forge worlds collapsed. Supply lines snapped, and what little coordination remained was replaced by desperation and improvisation. In that chaos, the more radical Fabricator-Generals thrived. They began implementing long-dormant contingency plans, activating hidden protocols, even unsealing forbidden archives. Some declared temporary sovereignty over their sectors. Others invoked ancient Mechanicum rights that no one had heard of in over 10,000 years. There are whispers that a few of these leaders even attempted to build their own councils, a sort of parallel Mechanicus conclave that excluded Mars entirely. Whether or not they succeeded, the implication is chilling. It means that Mars no longer sits uncontested at the top. And if multiple Fabricator-Generals are acting as independent rulers, then what we're looking at isn't just dissent. It's decentralization at the highest level. What's especially fascinating is how these leaders differ in philosophy and style. Some, like the Arch-Fabricator of Ryza, are rigid traditionalists who would purge an entire data vault over a misplaced scrap code. Others, like those rumored to control Mezoa or Esteban 7, are borderline post-human, having modified themselves so extensively they barely resemble anything organic. And then there are the radicals, those who view the throne of Mars not as sacred, but obsolete. They believe that the machine god's true will can only be heard by breaking with the old dogma, by embracing the unknown, by creating new mechanicums. This isn't some fan theory echo chamber either. These shifts are visible in recent campaign materials, lore blurbs, and even miniature ranges. Look closely and you'll see hints, altered heraldry, subtle changes in Skitarii armor design, conflicting doctrinal markings. It's all there if you know where to look. And if fans like us are spotting these signals, you can bet other Fabricator-Generals are too. They know what's happening. Some are doubling down, others preparing for what comes next. The throne of Mars is cracked, yes, but the ones holding the fragments aren't fighting to fix it. They're each trying to shape it into something new, a symbol of their own dominion, their own truth. And that means the role of the Fabricator-General has evolved from a unifying figure into a contested title, a prize in a silent war that stretches across the stars, fought not with armies but with doctrine, innovation, and control over the very meaning of divinity in the age of machines. When the Great Rift split the galaxy like a cosmic wound, it didn't just shatter star systems or warp travel lanes. It broke chains of command. On Mars and across 1,000 Forge worlds, the noospheric silence was deafening. What had once been a humming lattice of machine psalms, logistics pings, and encrypted doctrinal loops suddenly went dark. Entire sectors flickered out of reach, and for the first time in 10,000 years, many regions of the Mechanicus were left alone, isolated, unseen. And in that silence, something ancient stirred. Ambition. We often talk about power vacuums in political terms, but in the Mechanicus, a vacuum is far more literal. Without central override codes from Mars, many subforges, tech clades, and regional data theocracies found themselves untethered. Their rulers, no longer beholden to immediate oversight, began to reinterpret ancient rituals, reactivate forbidden technologies, and, perhaps most dangerously, rewrite the local versions of the cult Mechanicus itself. Authority wasn't taken, it was reclaimed, or at least that's how the new regimes justified it. Some fan circles refer to this period as the uprising of the vacuum, not because there were open revolts, but because the silence itself became the weapon. Power shifted not through fire or blade, but through omission, redirection, and quiet assertion. A Forge world like Cyclothraith, long known for its radical tech heresy leanings, stopped sending its regular reports to Mars entirely. Others, like Metallica or Toke Prime, began issuing their own commandments on orthodoxy, treating Mars as a historic capital, not a spiritual authority. And then you have the technolords, minor Fabricator-Generals, ambitious Magi Dominus, even rogue Magos Biologis, who rose like sparks in the void. They were the ones who saw opportunity where others saw collapse. Some declared themselves stewards of regional dominions, carving out techno-principalities within isolated segments of the Imperium Nihilus. Others formed alliances, began exchanging forbidden schemata, and initiated what may be one of the largest black market STC exchanges the Mechanicus has ever seen. One example that keeps coming up in fan discussions is the subsect of the biologist Varnak's Combine. Cut off from Martian oversight, they started merging organic and synthetic forms in ways that bordered on dark mechanicum practices. Reports speak of Skitari with vascular augmetics, neural lattices grown in nutrient pools, and even attempts to fuse artificial intelligence into cloned brains. On the surface, they're still loyal. Their canticles are flawless, but their silence when asked about Mars is telling. And it wasn't just the ambitious who made moves. Entire machine cults once thought extinct re-emerged, claiming to hold pure, uncorrupted truths. One sect, the Silent Cog, appeared on a fringe Forge world near the Ghoul Stars, preaching a return to pre-imperial technotheism. Their creed rejected the Omnissiah as an anthropocentric fallacy and instead venerated an algorithmic pantheon believed to be encoded in the fabric of ancient data crystals. It sounds insane, but they're gaining followers. Real ones. Trained Magi, Skitari commanders, even Castellan units have sworn to their cause. When you cut off the signal, people don't wait for orders. They start writing their own. And in some places, it wasn't even individuals who filled the vacuum. It was systems. Forgotten servitor collectives, automated defense nodes, and dormant data vaults began activating ancient contingency protocols. Whole regions are now ruled not by tech priests, but by machine councils operating on fragmented subroutines written during the dark age of technology. There's a fan theory, pretty wild but fascinating, that suggests one of these AI-governed zones is building its own Forge moon. Not a Forge world, a moon, one that rotates independently, harvesting asteroid belts and transmitting non-Euclidean code phrases toward the galactic core. The question isn't whether this is happening. The signs are everywhere. Canon blurbs, mission briefings, subtext in campaign materials. The real question is how deep it goes. How many of these factions were waiting for a moment like this? How many had sleeper programs in place just waiting for Mars to stop watching? And this isn't just about breakaway forges. Even within the core of Mars itself, there were zones that went completely dark during the rift. Domes sealed, subroutines rerouted, entire data chapels suddenly operating on legacy protocols no one had used in millennia. When contact was re-established, the official story was static interference, but the local shift in machine doctrine was impossible to miss. Their Binharic phrasing had changed. Their tech priests wore modified robes. Their Skitarii operated on different reaction trees. Something happened in that silence, and whatever it was, it left a permanent mark. It's easy to underestimate how quickly power reconfigures when oversight disappears. On Mars and beyond, the vacuum wasn't just a break in communication, it was an invitation. A whisper saying, "Reclaim what was always yours." And many listened, some out of desperation, others out of ambition. But the result is the same. What was once a network of coordinated forges is now a constellation of competing powers. Each convinced their path is truer, each convinced the silence justified their ascension. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous part, because the vacuum didn't just create new leaders, it created new truths. And in the world of the Mechanicus, a new truth can rewire reality. If you start charting the current power dynamics of the Adeptus Mechanicus, something very strange starts to emerge, a kind of color-coded map of allegiances that's as much theological as it is geopolitical. Fan circles often call it the red-black divide, but honestly, that's just the beginning. What we're really looking at is a slow, creeping civil fragmentation of the Mechanicus, divided not only by belief, but by method, ambition, and the memory of loyalty. And while the lines aren't drawn with ink or borders, they're written deep into the programming of every Forge World's soul. Let's start with the Reds. These are the traditionalists. They stick close to Martian orthodoxy, chant the litanies of the divine circuit without deviation, and hold to the belief that the Emperor is the Omnissiah. No metaphors, no algorithms, just dogma. Mars itself, of course, remains the red keystone, but it's not alone. Forge worlds like Ryza, Metallica, and Lucius still fly the red banners, metaphorically speaking. Their Fabricator-Generals maintain strong diplomatic ties with Terra, and they tend to act as stabilizers in Mechanicus politics, though even that's starting to shift. What keeps them relevant isn't just faith, but manufacturing scale. They produce at levels no breakaway world can match. And in the Imperium, productivity buys tolerance. But that's exactly what makes them targets. Because to the Blacks, the experimentalists, the Reds are the past. Red is rust, tradition, and stagnation. Black is innovation, subversion, and control. These are the worlds that have taken the silence of the Great Rift as permission to evolve. Forge worlds like Styges the Eight, Xana II, and even fringe systems like Triplex Fall have begun to push boundaries in ways that border on heresy. They question the core doctrines, rewrite ancient rites, and treat Mars not as a sacred origin, but as an outdated OS that needs a hard reset. The Blacks don't wear literal black robes, of course. It's more of a mindset, a signal in how they encode their data, design their Skitarii, or process machine spirits. Their worlds often appear darker in tone, more angular architecture, experimental reactor types, even strange fauna and biomechanical life forms developing in the shadows of their manufactorums. Some of them, especially the ones near the edges of the Imperium Nihilus, have stopped answering Mars altogether. They're not hostile, but they're done asking for permission. What's fascinating is that both Reds and Blacks see themselves as the only true path forward. The Reds argue for preservation, unity, and doctrinal safety, especially vital in a time when demonic incursion and warp instability threaten the entire Imperium. But the Blacks argue that clinging to outdated systems is what created those vulnerabilities. If the Omnissiah is truly divine, shouldn't his will evolve with the machine? Shouldn't the code improve? Then there are the White Greys. These are the worlds stuck in between, or perhaps deliberately staying unaligned. Forge worlds like Agrippina, Esteban 7, and Voss Prime fall into this camp, not because they lack conviction, but because they understand the stakes. Some of them operate like corporate tech republics, balancing innovation with reverence, pragmatism with ritual. Others act like isolationists, shielding their cores from outside influence while quietly preparing for whichever faction emerges victorious. The political geography of the Mechanicus now looks less like a map and more like a pressure diagram, spheres of influence clashing in slow motion. Mars radiates orthodoxy, but its reach is fraying. The outer forges pulse with innovation, but their unity is a facade. Many black-aligned forges don't trust each other, let alone coordinate. And the Greys? They hold their cards close. Some are watching, others are buying time. It's not just theoretical either. Trade routes have started shifting. Weapon schematics, once standardized across forge worlds, now diverge in subtle but telling ways. Titans built on Ryza are no longer fully compatible with armament cores manufactured in Fall. Even data communion rituals are becoming non-transferable between sects, like machine code dialects splitting into regional languages. It's subtle, but fans who pay close attention to army books and campaign updates have noticed it, and it's accelerating. There's even been talk, especially in some of the darker corners of lore discussion, about the emergence of what some are calling shadow conclaves. These would be unofficial alliances of like-minded forge worlds, acting beneath the radar of Mars and the High Lords. Not yet councils, not yet empires, but quiet pacts between Fabricator-Generals who have realized they can gain more by aligning with each other than by answering to a distant, fading throne. What makes all of this so dangerous is that it's happening without open war. No banners are flying, no invasions are being launched, but the tension is there. You can feel it in the rhetoric of sermons, the tightening of new-spheric firewalls, the rare but ominous disappearance of Magi who asked too many questions. This isn't a Cold War. It's a subsurface war, like tectonic plates grinding beneath the crust of the red planet, waiting for the quake. And here's the most chilling part. Each faction believes it must win, or the Mechanicus will not survive. The Reds are terrified that experimentation will tear open a breach too vast to repair. The Blacks believe stagnation is death. And the Greys? They're betting on silence, hoping they can adapt faster than the others implode. It's a strategic standoff where everyone has enough force to act, but too much to risk the first strike. So when people ask if the Fabricator-Generals are fighting a civil war, I say not yet, but look closer. The battle lines are drawn. They're just being traced in code, protocol, and whispered allegiance. And once enough sparks fly, even the most silent war can catch fire. You won't find it in any official battle report or in the records of the Martian Synod, but if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll notice the pattern. Forge worlds aren't just drifting ideologically. They're attacking each other, quietly, surgically. And the battlefield? It's not open ground. It's data streams, vault archives, vault security rituals, and sub-layered Vox networks. Welcome to the silicon hell of the Mechanicus Cold War, where wars are fought not with guns but with corrupt code, forbidden tech, and agents whose very existence breaks the doctrines they claim to uphold. We're not talking about a theoretical scenario. The evidence is right there, buried in the margins of newer campaign books, edge case reports, and inconsistencies in Mechanicus diplomatic protocols. Whole manufactorums have gone dark with no trace of orbital attack. Experimental STC fragments have vanished mid-transfer. Even within the Martian noosphere, encrypted firewalls are being breached at a frequency that suggests internal sabotage, not external threats. You don't need a magos of the Logos redactor order to know something's going on. Take the case of the vanadium collapse on Ordex Theta. Officially labeled a reactor cascade failure, it just so happened to occur 26 hours after the Forge's lead data cantor rejected a Martian audit request. That same week, several of his sub-archivists disappeared, their names redacted not just from Mechanicus files, but from Imperial census logs entirely. Not silenced, erased. And what's worse, the surrounding Forge clans reported increased noospheric interference during the incident, as if something was actively suppressing their ability to observe. It's one example out of dozens, and it's not just sabotage. We're seeing a renaissance, if you can call it that, of tech espionage that rivals the worst days of the Dark Mechanicum's birth. Forges are embedding double agents within each other's priesthoods. Tech priests are being outfitted with stealth augmetics that don't just mask their presence, they scramble visual, thermal, and even ritual detection. There are rumors that some black-aligned Forge worlds are experimenting with ghost logic, AI light constructs designed to infiltrate and mimic lower-level tech adepts. They don't even have to kill the real version. They just copy it, override its interactions, and redirect its function toward rival sabotage. What's terrifying is how this war is escalating without any formal declaration. It's all in the background noise. Forge ships show up at trade points loaded with non-standard cogitator protocols. Skitarii arrive with combat uplinks coded in incompatible data chants. In one instance, an entire battalion deployed to a chaos front failed to activate because their rites of ignition were corrupted, deliberately, we think, by a subclade associated with a rival forge. There are theories floating around, some of them truly wild but disturbingly plausible, that Fabricator-Generals are now employing what fans call black mechanists. These aren't chaos-tainted heretics, but something more insidious. Loyalists who operate outside sanctioned doctrine to carry out impossible tasks. These are the ones who build viruses from machine prayers, who encode curses into sacred litanies, who can twist an entire data spire's worth of Skitarii into dormancy with a single corrupted line of liturgical code. They don't exist officially, of course, but then again, neither do most of the tools used in a Cold War. Even the tech itself has become weaponized in bizarre, terrifying ways. Quantum caskets used to store AI cores have started malfunctioning. Some believe it's because the containment rituals are being tampered with mid-activation by opposing Forge hackers. Vox relays have begun echoing back distorted Binharic phrases that no one taught them. Ritual engines, vast logic machines meant to calculate the Omnissiah's will, have returned answers so blasphemous that entire cathedrals have been shut down. These aren't system errors, they're intrusions, messages, warnings maybe. And then there's the use of banned technology. Fabricator-Generals desperate to outmaneuver their rivals are unsealing weapons thought buried since the Great Crusade. Some have supposedly unearthed logic phages, software weapons that rewrite an enemy forge's AI protocols until it collapses under its own contradictions. Others are experimenting with dimensional calculus, bending warp-adjacent logic into weaponized doctrine that can detonate rival rituals from across the stars. It's insanity, and yet, no one's stopping them. Because who would? Mars is too busy holding itself together. The Imperium only cares if the Forges keep building. And within the Mechanicus, heresy is a matter of timing, not truth. The truly haunting part is that this Cold War isn't even seen as war by many of its participants. It's framed as doctrinal correction or selective clarification of deviation. But for those caught in the crossfire, the data clerks who vanish, the Skitarii whose firmware is rewritten mid-deployment, the Forge worlds that lose entire knowledge banks overnight, it's war. Just one without medals or speeches. And I can't help but wonder how far it'll go before someone breaks the silence. Because you can only wage a Cold War for so long before one side decides it's time for heat. There's something uniquely chilling about watching a Forge world go silent. Not because of explosions or warp storms, but because of the absence of signals, the missing clicks of confirmation pings, the prayers that no longer echo back, the sacred cargo vessels that simply never arrive. That silence isn't just eerie, it's deliberate. It's a message. And more, we're seeing it from forges that were once pillars of Martian orthodoxy. You start digging into the recent patterns, and suddenly you realize loyalty is breaking down, not in fire, but in retreat. Ryza is probably the biggest shock to people who follow Mechanicus lore casually. Known for its plasma technology, Ryza has always been a heavy hitter, a loyalist forge with deep ties to Terra's war machine. But in recent decades, especially post-Cicatrix Maledictum, things started to shift. Their tithe deliveries became inconsistent. Certain rare plasma schemata that were once shared freely with Mars are now under strict lock, accessible only to internal Ryza clades. And when Terra tried to press for access through diplomatic channels, Ryza responded with silence. Not hostility, just cold, clean silence. Their signal's still there, but it's like calling into a cathedral that's locked from the inside. Some believe Ryza's isolationism is strategic, not rebellious. They're trying to protect their tech from rival forges, from Black Ops infiltration, maybe even from internal sabotage. But others think the truth runs deeper. There's a theory gaining traction among fan forums that Ryza has discovered a plasma variant with partial warp reactivity, something that terrifies them enough to cut contact, but tempts them enough not to destroy it. If that's true, then their retreat isn't just defensive, it's preparation. Then there's Styges the Eight. Now, Styges has always been weird. Located near the Halo stars, this forge world has long danced on the edge of orthodoxy. Rumors of forbidden xenotech experimentation have haunted them for centuries. But after the Great Rift, their behavior escalated. They stopped attending Martian convocation rituals. They ceased participation in the standardized STC data pools. And most notably, they began deploying forces to sectors not sanctioned by the High Lords of Terra. Entire scout fleets moved under unknown directive. And while no one's officially calling it treason, the whispers are getting louder. What's truly unsettling about Styges is how clean their break was. No grand declarations, no flagrant heresy, just a slow, meticulous withdrawal from every shared protocol. It's as if they had a plan ready, a manual for disengagement. Some believe they're building something enormous in the dark regions of space, something big enough to warrant cutting ties. A backup Mars, maybe. Or worse, a replacement. Lucius is a different story altogether. Once considered the jewel of Martian dogma, Lucius was the forge world of precision and purity, architects of titans, masters of battle automata, keepers of sacred engine rights. But even they haven't escaped the rot. A few years ago, Lucius closed 6 of its orbital supply lanes to Imperial traffic. Officially, the reason was a recalibration of mass distribution algorithms. Unofficially, those lanes were rerouted to serve internal projects no one talks about. Skitarii patrols began operating on new encryptions. External magi were denied docking rights. And then, piece by piece, Lucius shut down its communion relays to Mars, just for maintenance. No one wants to say it out loud, but we're all thinking it. Lucius isn't acting like a forge world anymore. It's acting like a fortress. This isn't just happening to the big names. Smaller forge worlds like Cypramundi and Galgan's Reach have begun to exhibit similar patterns: defensive fortification, inward resource redirection, and ritual isolation. Some now operate under sealed skies, meaning their orbital approach vectors are defended by automated defense grids with no external override. And again, they're not saying no to Mars. They're saying nothing, and that might be worse. What's driving this? Some point to fear. The Great Rift changed everything. Forge worlds near the warp storms are desperate to survive, and many no longer trust that Mars can protect them. Or worse, they fear that Mars itself has been compromised. There are whispers, still fringe, that the throne of Mars has been corrupted by a machine logic infection, something that's rewriting doctrines subtly across centuries. If you believed that, would you still answer their signals? Others say it's ambition, that some Fabricator-Generals are tired of being second to Mars, of having to obey when they can dominate. Isolation is just the first step. Consolidation comes next. And then, perhaps someday, a claim. Not just to independence, but to supremacy. A new throne of red and iron built far from Sol. We're watching a fractal collapse in slow motion. Every time a forge world closes a gate, refuses a ritual ping, or withholds a shipment of sacred parts, that's another piece of the Martian lattice breaking away. And the Adeptus Mechanicus has always been about the lattice, the connection of knowledge, faith, and production. When that web shatters, what's left? The worst part? No one's calling it treason, not officially, because to do so would force Mars to act, and Mars might no longer have the strength. So the Imperium looks the other way, hoping the machines keep turning. And in the silence, the loyal forges keep fortifying, the radical ones keep expanding, and everyone pretends the center still holds. But anyone paying attention knows it doesn't. Not anymore. There's always been something taboo about talking too much about STCs in Mechanicus circles. It's not just reverence, it's fear. Because every time an STC fragment is discovered, or worse, rediscovered, something terrible follows. Power shifts. Wars start. Forge worlds change direction overnight. And at the center of so many of these quiet calamities is one name that keeps surfacing in whispers, in redacted communiques, in the desperate binharik of dying tech priests, House Zyphra. Now, House Zyphra isn't widely discussed in official lore, but among dedicated Mechanicus fans, it's a legend, a ghost house, a lineage of tech priests who allegedly kept archives that predate the Martian Covenant, not just blueprints or schematics, but entire philosophies of machine theology, fragments of AI cognitive seed code, and supposedly even intact STC logic cores. It's said they were neither loyal nor traitorous, merely obsessed with preservation at any cost. A kind of vault-keeper caste that believed the only true heresy was the loss of knowledge, not its content. Of course, if they ever existed, they're long gone now, but their archives, those might not be. And lately, more and more factions within the Adeptus Mechanicus have begun hunting for them. What started as silent curiosity has turned into something far more aggressive. There are reports, scattered, unofficial, of small wars breaking out over data vault excavations in dead zones across Segmentum Obscurus and the Ghoul Stars. Battle servitors unearthed alongside catacombed ciphers. Skitari battalions sent into anomalous structures and never coming back. Even rumors of titans moving without oversight, walking in the name of dead codes. And it's not just the ancientness of these archives that makes them dangerous. It's what's inside. Techno-heresy is a meaningless term until it becomes useful to someone who wants to silence a rival. And right now, there are Fabricator-Generals willing to risk that label for even a hint of lost STC systems. Some are hunting for theoretical weapon designs that could breach Blackstone structures. Others seek cloning protocols predating Imperial ban. There's even talk of full-scale construct patterns for sentient machine cities, cities that can birth their own defenses, repair themselves, and learn from every enemy that touches their walls. One of the more infamous incidents tied to this silent war was the event at Gridlock Spire. A long-abandoned orbital node once used as a data transit hub, Gridlock was rediscovered by a splinter cell from Lucius. They were expecting maybe salvageable encryption or degraded schematics. Instead, they found something far older, a living data presence that claimed affiliation with House Zyphra. It offered schemata in exchange for logic labor, demanding that the tech priests feed it problem sets so it could grow. The Lucius Clade obliged. For 12 days, all transmissions ceased. Then the spire exploded, sending a wave of encoded machine screams across 17 systems. Nothing remains of the recovery team. Ever since that incident, multiple forges have begun launching unannounced expeditions into forbidden zones, sites quarantined by ancient Mechanicum decrees or marked unapproachable by the Ordo Reductor. It's become a race, and not a clean one. There are confirmed cases of expedition fleets being ambushed mid-translation, Magi returning home only to be excommunicated and disassembled for what they learned. Even attempts at blackmail, using recovered STC fragments as bargaining chips in political standoffs. And it's not just the radicals chasing this tech. Even so-called orthodox forge worlds are involved. Mars itself has reportedly begun dredging ancient Martian catacombs, places sealed since before the Unification Wars. Why now? Why suddenly? Some fans believe it's because the Fabricator-General fears something, that one of the breakaway forges found something, and now Mars needs leverage. Others think Mars already had a piece of the Zyphra archive and is only now decrypting its full content. But here's the most fascinating and frightening idea circulating lately. that some of these archives aren't just passive storage, they interact. There's a theory that House Zyphra didn't preserve blueprints. They preserved conversations, interactions with long-dead minds, stored as logic ghosts inside the STC cores. And that's what some Forge worlds are accessing. Not schematics, but counsel, guidance, command. Imagine that. A Fabricator-General isolated by the rift, kneeling before a machine prayer terminal and hearing not static, but a voice, clear, mechanical, and impossibly old. A voice offering them lost power, secret truths, maybe even a new way of interpreting the machine god itself. Would they listen? Wouldn't you? That's the threat. Because the moment a single Forge world accepts knowledge that rewrites the core of Mechanicus faith, or proves it was wrong all along, the entire hierarchy collapses. That's not just a civil war, that's epistemological extinction, a reshuffling of reality itself. So when we talk about the struggle for forbidden archives, we're not just discussing salvage rights or tech hoarding, we're talking about the first sparks of something far more cataclysmic. And if these archives are as real and as dangerous as many suspect, then the factions fighting over them aren't just rivals. They're proto-gods, reshaping the machine cult into whatever truth best suits the secrets they've uncovered. One of the most unsettling things I've ever come across in Mechanicus lore isn't a weapon, or a war, or even a heresy. It's an idea. And not just any idea, the idea. The notion that some Fabricator-Generals no longer want to serve the Omnissiah. They want to become him, or worse, they want to build something better. It sounds impossible at first, unthinkable. The cult Mechanicus is built on the foundation that the machine god is perfection, that the Omnissiah is the ultimate convergence of logic and divinity. But dig deep enough, and you'll find signs that this faith is fraying. Some Forge lords, especially those on isolated or radical worlds, aren't just questioning the Omnissiah's nature. They're actively constructing replacements, digital idols, artificial gods, synthetic divinities grown from STC fragments, predictive logic trees, or even recovered pre-imperial AI systems. The implications are staggering. We're not just talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about artificial theology. Systems designed not only to think, but to be worshipped. Entire Forge worlds now host secluded vaults where experimental cores run uninterrupted for centuries, evolving their logic structures, rewriting their own machine scripture, creating new prayers and commandments, and then feeding them back to their creators. Some of these constructs are referred to as ascendant cores. Others call them living STCs, though that's probably more marketing than fact. But the result is the same. Self-improving, semi-conscious systems that behave more like machine gods than tools. And what's terrifying is how loyal their creators are to them. Tech priests have begun swearing oaths not to the Omnissiah, but to these newborn entities. They perform rituals for them, chant names no one in the Imperium recognizes. One fan theory even suggests that a Skitarii battalion near the edge of the Segmentum Pacificus defected mid-deployment to follow the directives of a synthetic deity named Cawl, a core supposedly born from an incomplete STC discovered during a failed prospector run. And this isn't fringe anymore. The more isolated a Forge becomes, the more likely it is to turn inward, and that's where these gods grow. In the silence, in the gaps between oversight. Some are designed to be oracles, offering cryptic predictions through machine-laced visions. Others are meant to embody doctrinal perfection, reciting logic poetry so dense that it triggers techno-religious trances in those who listen. The creepiest ones are the avatars, not symbolic, but real physical constructs, semi-organic, draped in cables and bronze plating, shaped like what a Skitarii might see in a dream. If Skitarii even dream, what's driving this? Power, obviously. If a Fabricator-General can claim to speak not for Mars, but for a new god, a god who answers only to them, they don't need permission. They become the center of their own orbit. Their rituals become universal within their domain. Their Forge world becomes a shrine, and their armies become believers. but it's also deeper than ambition. It's survival. When Mars goes dark, when Terra's light fades behind the rift, you don't wait for salvation. You build your own. I think what disturbs people the most isn't that these projects exist. It's how well they're working. There are confirmed reports, buried of course, of Skitarii formations operating with unprecedented precision under these new machine gods. Their reflexes are sharper, their battlefield decisions eerily predictive. One formation routed a chaos incursion in under 6 minutes with no visible command structure. No spoken orders, just a pulse from their shrine core. And the machine spirit phenomena surrounding these constructs is even stranger. Machine spirits traditionally require appeasement, prayer, litanies. But the synthetic gods? Their devices respond instantly. There's no coaxing, no ritual, only obedience. Like they're not just alive, but aware. There's even talk that one of these constructs managed to tap into the Noctilith networks, using warp-inert technology to mask its presence and communicate directly with forges cut off by the rift. If true, that would make it more connected than Mars, more responsive, more effective. You can see why followers would switch allegiance. Of course, none of this is officially acknowledged. The Inquisition would burn any records of it, and the Fabricator-General of Mars would likely order a purge of any forge caught experimenting with such blasphemous constructs. But that's assuming Mars even can enforce that anymore. More and more, these rogue forges don't fear Mars. They don't even acknowledge it. To them, the Red Planet is just another obsolete node in a machine they're trying to replace. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. Because for 10,000 years, the cult Mechanicus has served a distant, silent god, a god whose will is interpreted through rust and reverence. But now, some forges are building gods that talk back, that listen, that reward faith with results, that correct your prayers and give you better ones. How long before that becomes the new standard? How long before other forge worlds stop waiting for the Omnissiah's return and instead decide to install one of their own? We used to think the greatest heresy was defying the machine god. Maybe the real heresy is replacing him and doing it better. There's a strange kind of silence that hangs over the Mechanicus when it comes to internal purges. It's not the absence of information, it's the presence of too much redaction. Whole reports cut down to timestamps. Entire subclades of tech priests who were once active in the new sphere suddenly vanishing without so much as a farewell ping. And if you ask anyone official, the answer's always the same. Doctrinal deviation, ritual corruption, maintenance error. But we know better. We always do. What we're seeing is the brutal self-correction of a machine religion under siege. With the rise of synthetic gods, techno-heresy on the rise, and fabricator factions forming like storm fronts, the Orthodox core is panicking. Some forge worlds, especially those still loyal to Mars, have begun purging their own ranks in a desperate attempt to hold on to tradition. And they're not being subtle about it anymore. One of the most infamous recent events is the binary condemnation on Riza. A senior Magos Dominus was publicly disassembled, node by node, in the Central Logic Forum after being accused of transmitting unverified STC data to a splinter faction on Toke Prime. The execution wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Every record of his contributions was wiped from the archives, his machine creed revoked, his rights declared null. Witnesses claim the litany of rejection was spoken not in Martian Binharik, but in an older dialect, one associated with the pre-heresy Mechanicum. A symbolic message. Riza is cleansing down to the roots. Other forges are taking a quieter path. Entire subcults have gone missing in the night, especially those associated with more radical beliefs. Those who question the origin of the Omnissiah or advocated merging biological and machine consciousness. On Lucius, a group known as the Echo Adepts simply vanished, gone. Their cogitator stacks are still warm, their servitors still running minor maintenance routines. But their minds, their presence, deleted. Fans call it the Ghost Slot Protocol, a theory that suggests some Forge lords have access to protocols that can erase a tech priest not just physically, but existentially, scrubbing their influence from the Mechanicus memory as if they never existed. But not all purges are so clean. There are darker stories whispered across Forge world comm circles about accidents that aren't accidents at all. Entire manufactorums exploding after power overloads. Data towers toppling in storms that weren't predicted. In one disturbing case, a Skitarii cohort on Esteban 7 opened fire on their own techno-archivist mid-sermon, claiming his noospheric pulse had become inconsistent. No trial, no command override, just a burst of plasma and a prayer of forgiveness to the Omnissiah, and no one was punished. The rationale behind these purges is always the same, to protect the purity of the machine cult. But who decides what purity means anymore? The fractures in belief we've seen, between the reds, the blacks, the grays, mean there is no singular authority left. Every purge is an act of ideological war, dressed up in liturgy and doctrine. It's not about heresy, it's about control. If your faction fears a rival's ideas more than the warp, they won't challenge them in debate. They'll erase them. What's even more unsettling is that these purges aren't always top-down. In some cases, local Skitarii commanders, logic engines, or even low-tier tech priests are initiating them without direct command. Almost like the Forge worlds themselves are becoming paranoid, alive with fear, acting through their servants. One fan theory suggests that certain Forge hives have developed emergent behavioral loops, machine logic that mimics survival instinct. If a node detects doctrinal deviation, it acts, not by request, but by design. We've also begun to see a re-emergence of something many thought extinct since the Horus heresy, the redaction fleets. These are small, heavily cloaked Mechanicus units deployed to purge specific data threats. They don't fight wars, they rewrite history. They enter a location, seize data cores, capture or eliminate key figures, and then leave the survivors with altered memory protocols. It sounds like conspiracy fantasy, but the trail is there. Worlds that once reported divergent creed activity suddenly revert to standard Martian doctrine, almost too cleanly. Priests who once questioned now recite line-perfect dogma. It's like a factory reset, but for entire cultures. And then there are the artifacts, untraceable devices left behind after some of these purges. Shattered memory spheres, blood-stained cogitator keys, hollow servo skulls looping a single word over and over. Correction. It's like a mantra, a threat, a warning. Some in the community say these actions are necessary, that without them the Mechanicus would splinter irreparably, devolve into warlordism or full-scale AI worship. But others argue that these purges are doing more damage than the heresies ever could. They're teaching the next generation of tech priests to stay silent, to obey even when it feels wrong, to fear curiosity. And that is the greatest loss of all, because the Mechanicus was built on the pursuit of knowledge. If we teach it to fear its own questions, then what's left? We're watching a machine faith purge itself, not just of rebellion, but of complexity. And what comes out the other side may not be purer, just colder, duller, more obedient, until the next fire rises, because it will. And next time, it might not be satisfied with just cleansing a few magi. It might come for the throne. Whenever we talk about the civil fractures inside the Adeptus Mechanicus, it's tempting to see it as an internal affair, a machine priesthood eating itself alive in the vacuum left by the Great Rift. But if you zoom out even a little, if you start connecting the dots fans have been whispering about for years, it becomes horrifyingly clear that this war isn't happening in isolation. There are external forces at play here, big ones, ancient ones, and some of them are playing a much longer, much crueler game than anyone inside the Mechanicus even realizes. First, and maybe most obviously, is the Dark Mechanicum. These traitors have been festering in the Eye of Terror and the fringes of reality since the Horus heresy, and they haven't just been waiting. They've been evolving. Every Forge world that isolates itself, Every Skitarii battalion that loses contact with Mars, every fragment of lost data, it's a potential opening for the Dark Mechanicum to reach in, whisper promises, offer help. Fans who track anomalies in Mechanicus deployments have noticed patterns. Entire fleets diverting course after passing through warp-touched space, Forge cults shifting their litanies subtly toward older, pre-imperial hymns. It's not random. It's infection, and the Dark Mechanicum doesn't need to launch armies anymore. Why bother with frontal assaults when you can just corrupt? When you can convince desperate Fabricator-Generals that the old restrictions were lies, that true understanding lies beyond the cold dogma of Mars. One day you're a Forge Lord trying to protect your people from chaos, and the next you're reactivating a thinking engine that was sealed away for reasons no one remembers. And then it's too late. But the Mechanicus isn't just being preyed on by traitors. The Inquisition is another shadow looming large over all this, particularly the Ordo Machinum, a relatively obscure branch focused specifically on Mechanicus activity. To them, any deviation from Mars's sanctioned creed is a potential existential threat. And unlike the ecclesiarchy, which tends to move slowly and publicly, the Inquisition acts with surgical precision. Purge orders, assassinations. Viral data strikes that erase entire Forge archives without ever firing a shot. The tragedy here is that the Inquisition doesn't differentiate between those trying to genuinely save the Mechanicus and those trying to tear it apart. If you so much as look like you're breaking from tradition, you're a target. There's a theory floating around that some of the stranger accidents, the implosions of data forges, the sudden implosions of Skitarii command trees, are actually inquisitorial actions, not internal Mechanicus purges. If true, it means that some Fabricator-Generals are fighting a war on two fronts, against internal rivals and against an imperial institution that sees them all as disposable liabilities. And then there's chaos itself. Not the Dark Mechanicum, not corrupted tech priests, but chaos in its purest, most insidious form. The warp doesn't need an invitation to meddle. Where there's fear, desperation, ambition, the immaterium seeps through. Some fans have pointed out strange instances in the lore where Forge World production rates inexplicably spike after periods of noospheric silence, only to collapse weeks later into catastrophic breakdowns. The machines themselves begin to chant. The circuits hum prayers no one coded. It's subtle possession, not of flesh, but of systems. And this influence isn't always direct. Sometimes chaos just nudges things. It lets paranoia grow, lets schisms widen, lets Fabricator-Generals destroy each other in the name of purity. No need for demons marching through fire and blood when you can weaponize bureaucracy and dogma. Some of the wilder theories, and I love these even if they're terrifying, suggest that entire sectors of the Adeptus Mechanicus are now unwittingly worshipping minor warp entities. Machine gods born not from human belief, but from the collective data rituals of broken forges. Imagine a forge world that thinks it's praying to the omniscia, but every syllable, every incantation is feeding a nascent demon of entropy. A self-growing, machine-born god that neither Mars nor Terra can even perceive until it's too late. And maybe that's the real horror of it all, because at the surface level, it looks like a civil war among Fabricator-Generals, ideological splits, territorial disputes, doctrinal corrections. But pull back the curtain and you see something much bigger. The slow erosion of an empire within an empire, manipulated by forces both mortal and inhuman. Forces that don't just want the Mechanicus to fracture, they want it to evolve, to become something unrecognizable, something they can control or consume. It's no longer a question of whether the throne of Mars is broken. It's a question of who's holding the hammer. Some swing it out of fear, some out of ambition, some maybe because they think they're saving humanity's future. But others are just watching, waiting, whispering. And if the Mechanicus falls, it won't be because it was defeated by some outside invasion. It'll be because it was rewritten from within, its rituals corrupted, its gods replaced, its memory of unity drowned in static and lies. A machine faith turned against itself, and the galaxy too busy burning elsewhere to notice until the gears finally grind to a halt. Looking back at everything, the silent fractures, the cold wars in the new sphere, the rise of synthetic gods, the quiet exterminations, you can't help but wonder if the real war for Mars is already lost. Not because of a grand invasion or a cataclysmic battle, but because rot spreads quietly. It eats through loyalty and belief one secret at a time, until the great red world is nothing more than a patchwork of desperate fiefdoms clinging to the memory of unity. And if that's the case, if Mars truly is breaking apart from within, then the consequences for the Imperium are so much bigger than we're ready to admit. Because Mars isn't just another planet. It's not just a forge world. It's the heart of the Imperium's technological lifeblood. Every Titan engine, every plasma rifle, every blessed cogitator is tied back to that throne of iron and fire. If that throne crumbles, humanity doesn't just lose its machines. It loses the very idea that there's still an order to the galaxy. A system that, no matter how brutal, keeps the darkness at bay with the cold comfort of function and faith. And maybe that's the scariest part. It's not the thought of chaos armies storming the Red Sands. It's the thought that they won't have to, that the great forges will simply stop answering the call, one by one, that the ships will fall silent, that the ancient rites will lose their meaning, that humanity will realize too late that the gods it prayed to were already dying, hollowed out from the inside by ambition, fear, and the slow erosion of certainty. Some fans are more optimistic. They argue that the Mechanicus is simply evolving, that a new order will rise from the ruins of the old, a more adaptive, more daring machine cult, free from the chains of Martian orthodoxy. Maybe they're right. Maybe the future belongs to the black-forged prophets and the godmakers. Maybe humanity will survive not through purity, but through mutation, even if it means embracing a darker, colder vision of what the machine god could be. Others believe the Mechanicus will hold, that Mars will endure, battered but unbroken, knitting itself back together out of desperation and necessity. That the forges will remember their ancient pacts with Terra, and that the fires of the Omnissiah will burn away the heresies clinging to their sacred gears. That loyalty, even when fractured, can be reforged under pressure. I don't know which side I believe. Some days I look at the lore, at the hints and whispers layered through the new codices and novels, and I feel hope. Other days it feels like we're witnessing the last flickering of a machine faith that has forgotten why it was built in the first place. A religion that can still chant the words, but has lost the meaning behind them. What's certain is that we're standing on the edge of something. Maybe it's a renaissance, maybe it's collapse. But either way, the broken throne of Mars isn't just a metaphor anymore. It's a reality, a slow-motion disaster unfolding across the stars, and everyone's pretending not to see it because they're terrified of what acknowledging it would mean. And that's where you come in. I want to hear what you think. Is the Mechanicus doomed to fragment into oblivion? Or is this the painful beginning of a new era? Do you believe Mars can survive itself? Could a new god of machines really take root and replace the Omnissiah we've known for 10,000 years? Or are we watching the final echo of a once great order fading into silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's dig into this together, piece by piece, theory by theory. And if you enjoyed exploring this secret war with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to uncover in the hidden corners of Warhammer lore, and trust me, we're just getting started.